The U.S. expanding its role in another key maritime choke point. It's boosting military cooperation with Indonesia, increasing its presence near the Strait of Malacca, a critical shipping lane for oil heading to China. Israel and Lebanon meeting for the first time in their direct talks in over 30 years, taking place in Washington today, a possible ceasefire and border security on the agenda. The Egyptian foreign minister is expected to meet with Secretary of State Marco Rubio to discuss the ongoing war in the Middle East. Energy officials celebrating the groundbreaking of a natural gas pipeline in New York City. What the pipeline will be able to deliver to families in the region.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Thank you for joining us. President Trump says there could be an update on U.S.-Iran talks within days. It comes as the Central Command says the U.S. blockade against Iran ports has been effective. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Iris, good afternoon. So what is the latest on that?
Good afternoon to you as well. So President Trump today in a phone interview with the New York Post telling them that something could happen with U.S.-Iran talks in the capital of Pakistan over the next 2 days. And also reiterates the fact that the U.S. must make sure that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. And that's his number one precondition to a potential peace deal with Iran. Meanwhile, actually, in that interview, President Trump also telling New York Post that discussions were happening, but a little bit slow. And that's also when he suggested, actually, before telling New York Post that talks will happen in Pakistan previously, that he said it might happen in Europe as well. So a lot of eyes still on where exactly and when exactly upcoming talks will happen. As we know, over the weekend, that first round of in-person talks with Iran did not yield a deal after all. But also the president yesterday at the White House telling reporters that Iran has reached out and they want a deal badly. Here's what he said. Watch.
I can tell you that we've been called by the other side. They'd like to make a deal very badly, very badly. If they don't agree, there's no deal. There'll never be a deal. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and we're going to get the dust back.
And Don, there's some diplomatic breakthrough on another front, also related to the Middle East, and that is Lebanese and Israeli officials today met in Washington, D.C. at the State Department, along with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Rubio calling this meeting historic as this is the first high-level meeting between Lebanon and Israel over the 40 years. And Rubio saying that it's an important meeting as it could bring a permanent end to 20 or 30 years of Hezbollah's influence in the region. Here's what Rubio said. Watch.
Our hope here, and I know this will be a process, okay, all of the complexities of this matter are not going to be resolved in the next 6 hours, but we can begin to move forward and create the framework where something can happen, something very positive, something very permanent, so that the people of Lebanon can have the kind of future they deserve, and so that the people of Israel can live without fear of being struck by rocket attacks from a terrorist proxy of Iran.
Of course, this meeting comes at a very critical juncture amid a fragile ceasefire in the Middle East between the U.S. and Iran. Iran was demanding that Lebanon be included in the ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran, but we have heard from U.S. officials saying that that was not part of the initial ceasefire deal. So a lot to be seen on whether Lebanon or Israel could come to an agreement between themselves in the next few days.
Okay, thank you for updating us, Iris.
Of course.
And U.S. stocks are up this afternoon after pushing closer to record highs while oil prices drop as hope grows for a diplomatic path in the Iran conflict. The S&P 500 is up 1%, nearing its all-time high as of this afternoon. This follows a strong rally the day before that erased losses tied to the start of the war in late February. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up nearly 0.5% this afternoon, while the Nasdaq Composite climbed nearly 2%. Markets overseas also moved higher on expectations that talks between the U.S. and Iran could resume. Oil prices, meanwhile, pulled back. Brent crude fell to about $95 a barrel, and U.S. crude dropped to about $92. Investors are watching closely with a possible second round of talks under consideration before a temporary ceasefire expires. President Trump is calling on Britain to open an oil field in the North Sea. The president took to Truth Social, calling Britain's refusal tragic. President Trump posting, quote, "Europe is desperate for energy, and yet the United Kingdom refuses to open North Sea oil, one of the greatest fields in the world." The president pointing to Norway, saying the Nordic nation sells its North Sea oil to Britain at double the price. President Trump says that the UK was better situated on the North Sea, adding, quote, "Drill, baby, drill." Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank needed to prioritize financial stability and economic growth over climate agendas.
I think a lot about this Nature magazine article that came out in April of 2024 that became the kind of guiding principle for so much of the climate beliefs that GDP was going to be 60% lower by the turn of the century. And then so it was the gospel for 18 months, and then it was refuted. So everything was based on that. So, I don't think that we can have this kind of short-termism. I think we have to stick with core principles.
Congress is back in Washington after a 2-week spring recess. At the top of their list, a push for a budget package to fund immigration enforcement and expected moves to force a vote on U.S. military action in Iran. NTD's Chris Bob has the details.
The Senate is back in session Monday, and the House set to gavel in later Tuesday. Open hearings begin Wednesday as President Trump's fiscal year 2027 budget request takes center stage. A slate of top administration officials is set to testify, including Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins, and Energy Secretary Chris Wright. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans are advancing a narrow budget plan that would fund the Department of Homeland Security for 3 years through reconciliation. That effort is being led by Senator Lindsey Graham, with leadership aiming to send a bill to the president's desk by June 1st. On the Senate floor, debate will resume for the Save America Act. Some conservatives, including Senator Mike Lee, are pushing leadership to keep debate open longer, resisting efforts to move quickly to a final vote. That tension is also feeding into a broader fight over the filibuster. Senator Rick Scott posting on X, quote, "The filibuster was never meant to be a permanent veto. It's time to blow up the filibuster." And Senator Tommy Tuberville responding to Scott, quote, "Let's get rid of the filibuster now and finally deliver for the American people before it's too late." Lawmakers may also be forced to weigh in on U.S. military action abroad. Democrats are preparing to force a war powers vote that could limit the administration's ability to carry out military operations against Iran without explicit approval from Congress. Some Republicans are already warning against any concessions. Senator Graham writing, quote, "The only difference between al-Qaeda and the Iranian regime is that one is a Sunni terrorist organization and the other is a Shia terrorist state. No enrichment means no enrichment." Chris Bob, NTD News.
The House set to gavel in as President Trump's fiscal year 2027 budget request takes center stage. Senate Republicans are advancing a budget plan that would fund the Department of Homeland Security for 3 years through reconciliation. And now it looks like the Iran war could extend its impact into the midterms. Joining us now is Mike Leon, Director of Strategy at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. And we have Tony Kinnett, national correspondent for the Daily Signal and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. So good afternoon to you both on this Tuesday. So a number of things to talk about today. Tony, Trump's budget plan is asking for an over 40% increase in defense spending, historic $1.5 trillion. Some are calling it responsible, prioritizing taxpayer dollars. Others, like the Cato Institute, calling the $1.5 trillion fiscally reckless. What is your view?
Well, good afternoon to you both. And the Libertarian Institute thinks that spending is bad. Oh man, wow. Oh man, it shocked me there for a second. Now I'll level with you. It makes a lot of sense to me to restock the military. That makes sense. I'm also, again, I come from a defense heavy state. Indiana does a lot of defense manufacturing for the country. And obviously, I think that if we're going to talk about this, I'd better be upfront in saying that having seen a lot of these industries up close, that does mean a lot of manufacturing infrastructure that does get added to the economy in both the public and the private spaces. But of course, there's always an important thing to say here that skepticism over spending is a good thing. But when it comes to restocking the military, it makes sense. I mean, I understand both sides' concerns here. I'm not going to say that it's some, brilliant leap forward or push. It makes sense the United States keeps its supply of interceptors and, again, pushing forward an interception technology up to speed. But compared to the rest of the United States budget, it's not as big as it's being kind of made out to be on the social media posts. So I think that regardless of the president that we were looking at here, that we would likely see these kinds of proposals be brought forward, be he a Republican or a Democrat, when it comes to a defense spending budget, at least in the late to post-Cold War era.
So, Mike, let me talk to you now. $1.5 trillion. Does that make sense to you?
Well, good to see you guys on this Tuesday afternoon. There's going to be a fight happening in Congress, like there's one happening over my left or right shoulder, depending upon how you're looking at it, because I'm like a weatherman right now trying to read over. But this is a metaphor for what is happening right now with respect to, or what will be happening once Congress comes back in session, because I agree with Tony that military spending should be prioritized, not at the detriment of some of the other programs that are going to be impacted. So I know Tony glossed over the Cato Institute, and he'll maybe use the support when it suits him. I'm going to use it because it's suiting me right now, and also the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. Like, if you look at some of the things that we're cutting, it's antithetical to the America First or Make America Healthy Again, right? If you've got a 12.5% reduction in HHS, that's going to cut so much funding into HIV and AIDS programs. If you're going to cut into education spending, if you're going to cut into WIC and SNAP programs that help feed kids and educate children, that we should all be against that, because we're increasing the military spending by, like you said, Don, 44% is what this budget increase is asking for. Again, I'm with you on the high level priority of defending the nation and interceptors and different technology that will keep us ahead of the other, superpowers of the world as it be. But it has to come at a different cost analysis than what we're doing from a line item budget perspective with respect to some of the other programs that are going to be cut. And there's millions of people that are going to be affected by this. Again, not Mike Leon's words, other institutes, centers that have done the analysis and homework of how this is going to impact red states and blue states, respectively.
Okay, so Tony, let me ask you this. The administration is getting rid of the programs it characterizes as woke and wasteful, such as certain climate initiatives. So what do you say to this, that this proposal, this budget proposal, is using partisan ideology as a standard?
Well, I think that anytime you craft a budget, it's going to be partisan. The idea that there's some kind of magical nonpartisan, everyone smiles, everyone loves it kind of a priority list, I just don't think that exists. I think that all policy is inherently political, hence the sharing of the same first chunk of the name there. But in regard to cutting certain programs, whether they be, programs that of the HIV and AIDS are not just focused on the United States, but are focused on these large international initiatives that are not America First, that countries don't even use properly, as we look at how Kenya, we look at Tanzania, how we look at Zimbabwe, have spent a lot of the money for those programs over the last couple of decades. And then also we're seeing kind of the shifting on how the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the Department of Agriculture, handles SNAP. And when you're looking at how those certain funds are shifted, I agree there should be a certain section of the funding that is set aside for those things. But we could really solve a lot of that by privatizing huge chunks of things like the Social Security market, rather than sending that down the ever-trending spiral. And the reason that I kind of scoffed at Cato at the beginning is not because I don't think that using think tank data is a silly thing to do. I would probably cite the Committee for the Responsible Budget for my particular needs. Again, as Mike quipped, we use the data that suits our purposes in the moment. But when you have organizations that leave out key pieces of spending allocation because they're saying, well, I mean, after all, this is going to leave children hungry on the street, and stop it. The idea that we're taking money away from children and we're throwing the toys in the dumpster and we're going to create missiles out of it. I've heard this line before, and I have yet to see the impact in the budget, at least laid out in this proposal so far, that suggests anything of the sort.
So Tony, Mike, do you feel like there's a lot of waste and the budget cuts are needed because of that?
Well, I mean, either way, we're going to add to the deficit. I mean, we already know that. And I agree with Tony,
True.
like any president, Republican or Democrat, that proposes a budget, you can slice it and dice it depending upon your political leanings and just say, yeah, this is good, this is bad. So it should be partisan in nature. Totally agree with that point. My overarching point is, and I want it to be the central through line for people that are watching this, is truly not necessarily about an R and a D designation. It's about allocating resources properly. You started this segment, Don, with the question, 44% increase in military spending. That means to me that our priorities are out of whack because we're not taking care of things on the homeland. Yes, we're defending the homeland. And yes, we should attach a number that's maybe, 5-6% within that window to increase defense spending and keep us technologically advanced from our competitors. That doesn't necessarily mean we should cut into some of these other programs, and that's how we pull the money from. And that's my issue with this, because if you forget about the woke terminology and stuff like that, I can't get into all that stuff. We all know that those are buzzwords and phrases. That is water repellent for my ears. I look at the numbers, and the numbers tell me of what programs are being cut and impact to everyday Americans. And to Tony's point, yeah, it may not directly be taking money or food out of somebody's mouth and turning it into a missile, but there's an indirect effect of taking that money that's allocated for this necessary program and re-shifting it to a different program that is under the guise of something in Indiana that will be spent on defense spending, right? So there's an indirect, maybe not a direct one, but there is an indirect. So I look at it more of that. I want people to truly take out R&D designation. I know it comes with an R designation in terms of the budget because of who's the president, but we have to look at the impact to other programs and the way spending can be allocated and shift the percentages in different directions. So that way we all achieve what we want to achieve.
So, Tony, how do you respond to the argument that the priorities are not right? 44% increase in defense spending and then cutting other programs.
So first of all, just kind of clarify our numbers here. Just to kind of put this out here on the front, in fiscal year 2024, the military spending was about 13% of the budget. So a 44% increase based on how those particular numbers work puts it at just under 20% of the budget. That's a sizable increase. Again, 1/5 of the spending. Ooh, boy, that's quite a bit. And I would say that in regard to priorities here, this is where Mike and I might reach a fundamental difference that you have individuals in the United States arguing about for the entire history of our country, which is some of the way that the federal government spends money. I would probably argue the federal government particularly stinks at spending money. The programs the federal government institutes do a very poor job of providing services to people, because this is where I would kind of lean into kind of the irony here, where the Cato Institute used to be, which was the idea that federal governments are typically not the best steward to taxpayers' dollars, usually comes through. And we see this in FEMA. So I'm just to talk about FEMA for a second. I'm not even talking about the cases of the fraud or abuse that way, but the waste. We see so much waste in a lot of these programs, some of it due to understandable human error, but some of it due to the bureaucratic passing off of the buck. And so in regard to the priorities, people who see more of the waste in, again, let's say FEMA, might say next year, hey, FEMA, because they wasted so much in fiscal year 24, I'm just picking a random agency, I'm not saying we should cut FEMA, should receive less money next year because I saw the waste. Whereas someone in Western North Carolina who received direct help from FEMA, the first Fed agency they've ever had contact with outside of the IRS, might say, no, FEMA needs more money, don't touch it. It is the eternal merry-go-round of American budgetary fights. And of all the people that I've been given a lecture on this from, it would be former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who said he's lost more weight due to sweating from this argument than probably anything else in politics. And that's saying something.
So, Mike, do you have a quick comment on that?
Yes, I do, Don, because Tony, it's not even like a trap. It was more of like he wandered into the direction that I wanted to wander into by bringing up FEMA. FEMA's a perfect, and again, don't want to cut FEMA, totally agree with Tony, because of the planet's getting hotter and we have irregular weather patterns that are causing natural disasters. So we need a department like that to properly be funded. So I agree with Tony's overarching point. I think Tony and I are on the same page about these programs get bloated.
You had me up until there, my dude.
Red tape. Yeah, no, well, there's bureaucratic red tape. They're bloated and we have to cut them. Someone's going to be affected. What I'm saying is that, back to your original point, 13 to 20% is a huge jump. In any business, 13 to 20% will make people go, why are we spending a fifth on this? And what has been cut to allocate towards that fifth? So that's the way I'm looking at it and approaching it. And so when you give the FEMA example, I look at it as we should be spending even amount of resources to things that are impacting the homeland, because these are natural disasters, because they're happening more frequently because of global warming, because of what global scientists, not only here in the US, but globally, are saying about the planet and the unsustainability of some of this stuff. Even Elon Musk has said some of these things, which is why he's so adamant about moving to Mars and getting that space program up and running. So if we're all in agreement with that, then we shouldn't be cutting resources from that. And again, not using FEMA, I'm not saying FEMA is being cut. We shouldn't be cutting from things like that, because we have threats that are facing the homeland that are going to eventually require us to use those agencies. And I just think the jump in defense budget spending, while cutting some other programs that at a bare minimum, a lot of people depend on, is it bloated? Yes. Should we figure out ways to wean people off of it? 100%. Is the government good at doing that? They are not. Totally in a lockstep with all of that. The problem is right now we have to live in the real, and we'd have millions of people affected by some of these cuts. And the bare number that they're seeing is, like you said, 13 to 20% of the overall budget, a fifth of it being spent on defending the military and the homeland. That can be allocated into other things that can help everyday Americans, in my opinion.
Okay, so Tony, let's get a quick response from you on that. And then let me ask you something about the Iran war. President Trump said yesterday gas prices could stay elevated through the November election, midterm elections. So has the war impacted Republicans' chances at winning the elections?
Oh, it's a lot to dive into one quick response. So to quick follow through to Mike's response there, I'd say, no, there's not generalized consensus that on the rate of human climate change and expansion. According to data from the NOAA, actually an investigation that we did as a former science teacher, certain levels of carbon in the ocean have gone down considerably over the last couple of years. And the individual who came up with that data got in significant trouble for refusing to release that data because it might look the Trump administration look rather too good on certain environmental matters. So the idea that the climate change, that it's spiking level weather, that's not how weather works. I'm pull the science teacher card here and say no. That fear mongering from Chuck Schumer about hurricanes is ridiculous. But aside from, again, the different priorities and kind of social causes, whether they be HIV and AIDS in other countries or PBS and NPR, or we're talking about climate change in the budget, I think the Trump administration's best course here would be to market exactly what they are moving around in the budget proposal to cast that certain framework for the budget. Over to the Iran war side of things. It is a very long way until November. The things that we were talking about 2 months ago are not in the current lexicon for what we're talking about now, news cycles, and very, very quickly. Do I believe that gas prices are going to be in the $4 range by November? No, I don't see that at all. Already right now, what we see is actually the Brent crude oil coming down significantly. The last I checked before we hopped on air, it was in the early 90s. I think that as we actually see this conflict draw to a close, that because a lot less of the oil infrastructure that was hit than I thought, or than the administration thought might be hit, could there be some impact in and of itself? Sure. But do I think that we're going to see upper threes, low fours in the gas prices come November? I don't see that in the data. I think it's way too early to say that. Trump also just says things in that way, unless he scratched his chin, looked at the data, and then answered. I think he's just saying it could be, maybe, who knows?
Return of the Trump impression. Okay, so Mike, what do you think about the midterm elections through the lens that this war is happening right now? Gas prices hitting the $4, maybe $5 range. Do you think voters will remember what happens now in November?
Voters don't remember anything. That's why political strategist jobs were invented. So that way you can blame the previous strategist that you had. And he was like, he wasn't doing this or that in the right direction. So no, voters don't remember anything. I've equated it to Finding Dory. They are the fish. You have to keep reminding them that they're living in the water, that they're the fish. So, but Don, to your point though, and Tony's right, we're a long way away from November. Early voting does start obviously in some states earlier, but the emphasis will be if gas grocery prices, if there's another conflict that we don't know about that's been started, if ground troops, for instance, have been deployed into Iran as the conflict is continuing, right? We don't see an end. I know the president said maybe a few days, it doesn't matter, it's almost over. I'm not going to do the impression, but I want to. A lot of people say it's so good. But I think that we are so far away from November that the economic impact and factors right now that we're looking at, you can't carry that over because the voters are not going to remember that stuff over. Yes, there are going to be ad messages from Democrats about what happened now and gas prices going high and the president starting a war, his own words, not mine. But I don't know if that'll carry over because, to Tony's point, if come October, end of October, coming into November, gas is $2.99, and there has been some cost of goods that have gone down, and the jobs report month over month is going or trending in the right direction. Now, all of a sudden, Republicans will start to take that and say, hey, new game back on, war's over. He did solve 8 wars. I don't know if the other 6, but you know what I'm saying? Like, they can carry that message and combat the fight that the Democratic Party will put up about the current moment that we're living in right now, Don.
You know, sometimes I think we need a third person in this panel just to judge, be an impartial judge on who does a better Trump impression. But that aside,
well, a lot of people say it's me. A lot of people say it.
Yeah, Mike.
Anyone can put on a light gray jacket and impersonate Trump. That's what they're all saying.
Well, I've never heard of Tony Kinnett. Never heard of him. Sorry, Don.
I'll let you know next time. I'll ask the producers, and I'll let you know next time who the producer thinks does a better impression. But let me ask you this, Tony. You know, the midterms usually is not beneficial for the president's party and often decided by economic perception rather than foreign policy. So, I mean, does the economy need to be in a better place than previously because of this advantage, in order for Republicans to have a better chance of winning?
I mean, according to the polling right now, and I'm looking at a series of polls over on Real Clear Polling's kind of generic congressional aggregates of all of what I'm looking at, people are tired of both parties. There is about as much excitement to get out and vote for your congressional candidates of choice as there is to go stand in line at the DMV. And this is going to carry over unless you see someone produce, and I told you so, they want results. Americans want results. The Gulf War, after the Gulf War ended, American sentiment swung wildly in President H.W. Bush's favor, wildly in his favor. Now, again, things then changed and he ended up losing afterward. But again, we can look at the initial immediate impact. Americans like winning. If by the time we get to November, prices drop, it's exactly what Mike said, then it's likely that Democrats are not only not going to take the Senate, they may not take the House, given low propensity voters. And right now, one of the most consistent truisms of both parties is that they will do anything to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And so, again, like we've seen with kind of the Democrat side of the aisle right now, all they have to do is hit on the basics that are in front of Americans, and they can't do it. And all Trump has to do is put the phone down, and he can't do it. And so it's really going to be a who can be dumb the last question as to who's going to lose in the midterms. I said this back in 24, and I think it was true then. I think it's going to be true in the midterms because no one really cares about Congress, and that's a sadness in and of itself.
So, Mike, do you agree with that Democrats can't hit on the basics?
Yeah, well, Tony makes a great point, and I will just share Democrat, Republican side. The Republican side, I had a friend, MAGA supporter, Trump supporter, and he texted me a meme that says, you know, when you're trying to defend the president, but then he posts a picture of himself like Jesus, and it's the Jonah Hill meme of scratching the eyes. And it's true. And then on the flip side, you know, I just had Scott Colomb on, who's running for Senate in Mississippi. He's the Democrat candidate that's going to go up against Sidney Highsmith. And I told him, I said, the question I asked him was, what's the economic narrative? What's the message? Because it cannot be that Trump sucks. The Trump sucks platform, for lack of a better term, can't be what you're proposing or what other Democrats are proposing. There has to be some meat on the bones and some concrete answers to this. And he gave me 3 things that a lot of Democrats are taking with them, right? Protect the healthcare How do we increase jobs? The tariffs have kind of caused some of these things, even though they're in agreement with bringing back some semblance of American manufacturing. So there is some messaging there, and how they carry it out on the ground, Don, is going to be key, because as we know, in midterm years, voter turnout is definitely lower. And the president's party you just mentioned does tend to lose or swing votes depending upon the chambers. But we're not going to be in the same place that we are. We better not be in the same place that we are now, because then the answer gets real easy, and this segment's really easy. And Tony's going to have to do a lot of tap dancing. I'm going to be, just giving everybody the bare bones basic. I don't know what happened. A lot of people say it wasn't me, but I don't think we're going to be in that same spot. So what are Democrats saying that is concrete enough for a voter to say, okay, I get what you're saying, and I see the path. I will vote for you because you guys can actually make change in Congress. But Tony and I said this in the last segment of last week. Congress hasn't done their job. The legislative branch has passed the lowest amount of legislation over these last few different instances of Congress. So they have been trending down. Voter approval has been trending down about Congress in the House, in the Senate. Everyone thinks it's a celebrity contest. Just get your tweets out, get on TV the most. There's been surveys and studies that have been done about how members of Congress have tried to increase their profile without necessarily actually passing legislation that has helped their constituents. So, it's a big mixture for an off year, midterm year, I should say. And so we'll see how it all plays out, but we're not in the same spot right now. So we can't really project what's going to happen in November.
Okay, so they're telling me to end it right here, but Tony, you had a reaction when Mike mentioned that image of Trump. He says he's portraying himself as a doctor. I'm too curious on that. What were you laughing about?
There's a different meme of a guy smoking a cigarette leaning against the building as an indie fundy Baptist. I was like, why do it? And the doctor excuse, by the way, was garbage. That was just, nope, don't do that.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you for talking to us. See you guys next week.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune is speaking to the press right now on the DHS funding bill. Let's take a look.
Pass a reconciliation bill that would enable those agencies to continue to be funded 3 years into the future. So I'm trying to figure out exactly, as I think about it, what the Democrats got out of all this. Thanks to the work we did last summer in the Working Families Tax Cuts bill, the ICE and CBP agencies are funded. Both people, field staff, but also civilian staff, office staff are all being funded. And thanks to the good work that the President did, some of the other agencies within the department are currently being funded. All of the things that the Democrats made this about, which was supposed to be about reforms to the way that ICE and CBP operate, they got none of that. Zero. And now we're going to fund those agencies for 3 years into the future. The only thing the Democrats got out of this was they now own the issue of open borders and defund law enforcement. Honestly, I don't know what else they walk away from with this other than, again, trying to destroy the appropriations process, which historically has been done in a bipartisan way. But the Republicans are going to stand with our Border Patrol, with our law enforcement agencies, and we're going to ensure that they are funded not only today, but well into the future. And so the budget resolution Senator Graham is preparing, we will have on the floor hopefully as early as next week. We'll provide multiple years of funding for these agencies, and a reconciliation bill, which will follow shortly after, will ensure that that job gets done. So that's where we are in the process, but we're going to move quickly, decisively, and hopefully in a very focused way on ensuring that those important law enforcement agencies, contrary to the Democrats' defund law enforcement efforts, are funded not only today but well into the future.
Mr. Leader, on Iran, Leader, President Trump has repeatedly threatened civilian infrastructure. Last week he said that if his demands weren't met, an entire civilization would die. Are those kinds of threats from the president something you're comfortable with?
I think what you got to, again, look at what the president is doing. And I think right now he's trying to open up the Strait of Hormuz, which I think we are all supportive of, and the efforts that are being made there to further isolate the Iranian regime and their economy, which is an energy-dependent economy, hopefully will have the desired effect. And we'll get the strait open again, and that's sort of their last resort. I mean, the military effort here has been extraordinarily successful. This is the sort of the last dying gasp of this regime, is to try and shut down the strait. And the administration is making an effort to ensure that it's open, that there can be traffic in and out of there, and hopefully that'll be successful, and we can begin to see this thing wind down.
Mr. Leader, I know that I know that your challenge is to try to keep this reconciliation bill as narrow as possible. Are you and the Speaker on the same page as to what will be in this bill?
We have spoken regularly, and the White House has been involved in all these conversations. So, you know, I don't speak for the House or how they do things. We have our own unique challenges here in the Senate. But as we initiate this process, the budget resolution followed up with a reconciliation bill, and what it will include are all elements that I think that, as we have talked with the Speaker and folks in the House of Representatives, they understand where we're going.
You worried they're going to ask for other things, though?
Well, they could. I mean, we have members who want other things. I mean, I want other things. But obviously, we have a specific mission and purpose here, and that is to ensure that these important agencies of our government that have vital functions when it comes to our homeland and national security are funded. That is a narrow and specific purpose, and my hope would be that if we can execute on getting that done here in the Senate, the House will be able to follow through.
Can I ask you on the issue of funding the government, though? It has been weeks since the Senate passed their bill to keep DHS funded. It is still sitting in the House. How long are they going to be sitting on that package before DHS is finally funded?
Well, again, and this, remember, this all happened because Democrats would not vote to fund any of these law enforcement agencies. But I'm hopeful that if we can show evidence and progress, and if we can get on this next week, which I think we can, on a budget resolution that would ensure that we are going to fund these agencies, that the House will be able to move the appropriations package. Right now, as you know, all these agencies are being funded because of action that the President took, but that's not something that's sustainable over the long term. These agencies need to be funded, and we want to make sure that the agencies that are not going to be handled through reconciliation, ICE and CBP, also have funding for the rest of the fiscal year.
Senator, do you have intention to vote on AUMF regarding Iran if this conflict goes beyond 90 days, or are you open to voting for an AUMF if that conflict goes beyond 90 days?
I think at this point, most of us, I believe, feel pretty good about what the military, the American military, has achieved there in terms of its objectives. And, you know, that's something, obviously, it's a hypothetical down the road, but I think by and large, if you look at and we're going to have an opportunity to vote on some war powers resolutions that the Democrats are going to try and trigger. But I think the administration has a clear objective, a clear plan, and if they can execute on it, hopefully that question won't be a necessary one that we'll have to answer.
Senator, there have been 2 House members that have been forced to resign as a result of sexual assault allegations. Do you believe that there is a culture on Capitol Hill where those who feel that they've been victimized can report those actions and seek accountability? And if not, should more be done to allow that for those potential victims?
I think we're always, there are better ways of ensuring that people in vulnerable situations, like some of them, I'm not familiar with all the particulars and the details, but what happened in the House, ought to have access to a way in which they can get recourse and relief, for sure. And if there's a better way to do that, I'm certainly open to it. I think it's unfortunate what we've observed and seen here in the last few days about certain members of the House of Representatives. And I guess I can tell you that I think we would all attest to the fact that I don't think that's a reflection of these institutions generally, and certainly not something that we would abide here in the United States Senate.
And that was Senate Majority Leader John Thune giving an update on DHS funding, saying that what he sees as the shutdown continues, what Democrats are getting out of this is nothing but responsibility of trying to defund law enforcement and trying to keep the border open. That's what John Thune is saying, and also saying that he supports what President Trump is doing in the Strait of Hormuz, trying to keep it open. Okay, let's take a break now. Still ahead, from the tragedy of Columbia to the triumph of Artemis II, former NASA test director Mike Cianelli is here with us in studio to talk about what this moment means for the future of space exploration. Stay with us.
Shenyun Creations, the streaming platform from Shenyun, featuring world-class dance, past programs, and all original music. Masterclasses, behind the scenes, comedy, and more. Explore shenyuncreations.com.
Hi, I'm Susan Lucci. You may know me from my many years on television. I never thought about heart disease until I had my own heart event. I felt this slight pressure on my chest, just slight. I thought, oh, it's nothing, it'll go away. I didn't get it. I did not get it. But a few days later, while shopping at a boutique, that pressure returned, much stronger. It felt like an elephant pressing on my chest. I had a 90% blockage in my main artery and a 75% blockage in the adjacent artery. I was rushed into surgery where I received 2 stents in my arteries. Stents developed through research funded by the American Heart Association. Those stents saved my life. That's why I'm in front of you today, asking you to join me in supporting the American Heart Association by becoming a monthly donor. Call now or go to helpheart.org. For only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can help fund the next medical breakthrough. Get the next person trained in CPR, the next hospital certified in high-quality cardiovascular care. I'm so grateful to the American Heart Association. Their research helped save my life. I can enjoy life with my children, my grandchildren, and my friends. Heart disease is America's #1 killer, and your support now can help save your life or the life of someone you love. Give $19 a month with your credit card, and we'll send you this special t-shirt that you can wear to show that you are helping save lives. Please, listen to your heart. The only reason I'm here today is because I did.
Please call the number on your screen or go to helpheart.org. Become a monthly donor during February Heart Month, and your first month's gift will be matched.
Thank you.
Discover the ancient secret to vitality and longevity with Puretane Black Ginseng. Crafted from premium 6-year-old Korean ginseng, each root is carefully nurtured for over 2,260 days, undergoing a traditional 9-round handcrafted process of steaming and drying to unlock full potency and absorption. Experience pure natural energy with Puretane Black Ginseng. Order now at puretane.com.
Joining us now to talk about the Artemis II mission is Mike Cianelli. So Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. So talk to us a little bit before we get started, a little bit about your background. What do you do?
Well, thank you for letting me be here. This is great. My background is as a NASA test director. So I've had the honor for 30 years to work in NASA's space program, working as a test director, so basically running Launch Countdown with a great team of folks. So a lot of exciting missions throughout the Space Shuttle program, and now exciting watching and getting ready for the Artemis program, which is going back to the moon, following Apollo's footsteps. So I had a great past and looking forward to a great future.
So the Artemis II splashed down just 4 days ago, and this is the first crewed mission beyond low Earth orbit in over 50 years, right? So this is very significant, historic. So as someone who spent decades preparing for missions at the Kennedy Space Center, what went through your mind exactly when you saw this capsule touch down safely back on Earth?
It felt amazing. It felt amazing. I mean, we get excited. We prepare for so many years before launch day, right? It's like our Super Bowl. So we prepare for so many weeks and months and years. And you have not only the work you do, but you build up the anticipation and excitement. So when the launch goes off, of course, you're watching every single thing. Throughout the mission, we're enjoying the mission, but really we're watching the systems and the crew. Our goal, is just like you said, is to get them back down safe to Earth. So when you see them finish their mission, come through the atmosphere, which is another dangerous phase, and then splash down with those beautiful parachutes open in the ocean, the crew hatch opens up and they're out there, they're successful, they're happy, they're doing well. That's a feeling of mission complete I can't describe more than it's just raw excitement and thankfulness that we got the crew back home.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm by no means an expert on this, but they made it look easy, which I'm sure it's not, of course. A lot has to go right in order for this to go smoothly. So just talk to us about some of the process here and the ethos of everyone involved in this whole procedure.
Absolutely. And if we do our job right, it looks easy. I can assure you it's not easy. It's a lot of fun, it's a lot of hard work, but it's not easy. But if it looks that way, that means we've done our job right. So, like I said, a lot of anticipation, you're watching every single system because we learn it doesn't take much for a good day and a bad day. If we make small little mistakes, you can have big consequences. And things can turn very quickly. So you don't keep your eye off the ball, you keep your focus on the mission. As we learned in Apollo 13, back in 1970, the crew was going along to the moon, everything was fine, and then within a couple of seconds, the whole world changed. And we just got the crew home unexpectedly through a very daring endeavor. So we know things can change very quickly for the bad. So we're watching that, being very mindful of that. So we're, again, enjoying it, but we're also working very hard behind the scenes. But you're working with a fantastic group of people. The talent level, the passion level of these folks is off the charts. It's an honor to be in the same room with them and to be working with them on a mission like this. So the ground team is excited. The crew on orbit's excited. And when you put those both together, it's like perfect harmony in a symphony. Everybody's playing their instruments perfectly tuned, and it's just music to our ears.
And what are the astronauts going through when they re-enter Earth in those minutes?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because for 10 days they've had weightlessness. So for 10 days they don't feel like they weigh anything. So it's very easy to get around. You just kind of push off from one side of the bulkhead and you're at the other side pretty quick. But when you start hitting the Earth's atmosphere, you start feeling that weight come back. And not only do we feel the weight come back to 1G, which would be your weight on Earth. So if you weighed 150 pounds on Earth, you'd feel 150 pounds on the capsule. They actually exceed that. So they're going between 3 to 4 Gs. So you can triple or quadruple your weight. So they're feeling a lot of pressure. They're being pushed back in their seats. They're feeling it a little harder to breathe. And they know something is happening pretty intense as you're coming through the atmosphere. And then it settles out, gets a little slower back to 1G. And then it does take a while to get back to Earth. It takes a while to get back to walking and doing things normally because, again, your body's not used to having to do much work in weightlessness. You just kind of move around a little bit easier.
Right, no gravity in space and all that, right?
Exactly.
So talk to us about the stakes of this mission. What did this mission have to prove exactly before NASA moves forward with the next steps?
Yeah, it's a stepping stone. So our ultimate goal is to build a base on the moon and have a permanent presence on the moon. To get there takes a bunch of steps, okay? Much like a large trip, you start small and you plan it. So the first mission was to test the capsule out, making sure the launch vehicle and the capsule worked well. So we did that in Artemis I. Artemis II was focused on putting a crew on board, so testing out the environmental control systems, making sure the life support systems worked well, the capsule controls itself appropriately, so all the lunar trajectories and orbital mechanics works out with the crew on board, and testing, of course, coming back to Earth's atmosphere with the heat shield. Artemis III is the next step, and we actually changed from a couple months ago, we changed the profile. We're going to keep that as an Earth mission, Earth orbit mission. So we're not going to the moon in Artemis III, but we're going to go back up, we're going to check systems out, and now incorporate the human landing systems. Because in order to land on the moon, we need landers. So we're going to bring those up to Earth orbit, which is closer to home, and we're going to check out the integration between the Orion capsule and the landing systems to make sure all those bugs are worked out. Because Artemis IV is then taking the landing system and the crew and going to the moon for a landing. So you can think of it as many stages of dress rehearsal, preparing, putting it all together, so when we do get to the moon with everything, we're ready to go.
Okay, so on that point then, what is Apollo doing, what is Artemis doing that Apollo didn't?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit different in some ways. So Apollo took different steps. Of course, Apollo was the first time we did this. So for example, Apollo 8, which was similar to Artemis II, Apollo 8 actually orbited the moon. Artemis II didn't orbit the moon. We just kind of slungshot around it, used lunar gravity. So there's different phases. So we're trying to do the due diligence steps to get to the moon, but we also had different checkout procedures and processes for Apollo. So we checked out the lunar module in orbit. We checked out the capsule on Apollo 7. So we're doing things in a little bit different order, and we're actually adding a flight, which is the new Artemis III. It was going to go from 2 right to landing. And NASA management looked at that and says, you know what, we need to put an intermediary step to make sure everything is checked out in Earth orbit in case something doesn't work right. It's better to fix it closer to home than find out when you're close to the moon. So that's where adding an additional step into it. Apollo was very forward-thinking. We were trying to get to the moon by 1969, so it was a very ambitious program. And we're trying to take those lessons learned from Apollo and say, okay, where are the more risky parts of flight? What should we test more in a closer to home environment and put those in effect for more mission success? So using a lot of the Apollo lessons learned is what we're doing different.
Okay, so that's a great point. What were those lessons that were learned exactly?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of risk. So you have certain redundancies. Once you land on the moon, you can't really sit down and fix things. It's got to work. So we had a lot of lunar missions that were closer calls. Of course, back then the computer technology was not as advanced as today. As a matter of fact, your cell phone has more computer power than the lunar module that landed on the moon, which is incredible to think about for today. So we did a lot of manual flying, and some of the landings were a little closer to having a closer call than not in the history books. So we learned those lessons. We've automated a lot of systems. We learned how to do autonomous flying, so the vehicle's watching over itself a lot, which helps the crew, which allows the crew to focus on other things. So you have more advanced warning for things maybe going wrong, more diagnostic information, and that's absolutely critical because, as you can imagine, if flying at 25,000 miles an hour, every second counts. So having that is a tremendous lesson learned. Not to mention the reentry profiles, the aerothermal heating. There's so many physical dynamics that we learned from Apollo we're going to use in Artemis.
So you mentioned something very fascinating to me earlier, that we're trying to have long-term presence on the moon. Yeah. So I grew up with, Star Trek, Star Wars. So where do you see, are we going to have people living on different planets? Where do you see space exploration in the next 10, 20 years?
Wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, and the exciting thing is we don't 100% know. And that's the exciting thing about the future, is what the potential is. It's unlimited if we go for it, right? So the near term is to build a base. Apollo, for lessons learned, we stayed between 1 to 3 days. So it's like a short camping trip, if you will. I went to the moon, lived for a couple days and came back. Now we want to stay, and that presents a whole bunch more challenges. You've got radiation concerns on the moon. You have how are you going to feed the crew for extended durations? Water, basic human function systems, how do we do that? So there's a lot of learning to do. So we're going to stretch it out from days, hopefully into weeks and months, perhaps even years at some point. And the reason for that is the more knowledge we gain, the ultimate goal is to go to Mars. So we want to go to Mars. Of course, Mars is a lot further away, a lot harder to get there. So we really want to learn in our backyard, if you will, right, on the moon, and then get there. And then, of course, the sky's the limit. So we've got more planets out there to explore, more solar system. The universe is huge. So there's really no stopping us if we commit together as a people and to say we're going to go explore things and discover everything we can.
I also grew up with the Aliens movies, but let's not go there for now.
That's a different show, a different time.
Okay, before we wrap up here, why is it important for the U.S. to do these types of things, whether we're talking about going back to the moon or going to other planets? Why is it important for the U.S. to maintain this space race?
We've seen throughout human history, so I always say history is our guide, and those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it, right? So we learn through history, and all the great nations and great civilizations and cultures have had a spirit of exploration and discovery. You can go back for thousands of years, right, in the Orient and in Asia, and the explorers back then. You can go through Columbus and Magellan, and all the great explorers were supported by countries that wanted to do that, right? Make those scientific discoveries and explorations and bring those home, because a lot of what we do in space has impact on Earth. It's not just for the sake of exploring, but all the spin-off technologies and all the things we learn, we advance ourselves in so many directions. So for an economic purpose, for civilization and our culture, I think discovery is written in a human heart to explore and discover things. And then it's the inspiration factor. So many kids today are watching what we're doing very closely, and it's inspiring them to be an astronaut, to be a carpenter, whatever they want to do in life, it doesn't matter. But they're pursuing their dreams and realizing there's no limits to what you can achieve. So those are the intangibles in the space program, but nonetheless incredibly important.
Yeah, that is so profound. I very much enjoyed this conversation, Mike. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
The House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party is calling on the Treasury Secretary and the IRS to investigate CCP-linked political activity through nonprofit organizations. The committee says China is using United Front organizations to influence and donate to political candidates most notably in New York City. NTD's Shar Marshall has more.
Nonprofits are supposed to check yes on their 990 tax forms if they engage in political activity. But some Chinese Communist Party-linked nonprofits are being accused of participating in such activities when they're not supposed to be, risking their tax exemption. They've allegedly been doing things like showing up at political endorsement events and donating funds to political candidates that oversee Chinatown districts. The House Ways and Means Committee has found that some so-called hometown associations, which are meant to support the Chinese community through cultural events, have also been engaging in political activity that manipulates United States institutions and supports the interests of the CCP.
Well, the fact that China's been trying to infiltrate our government has been going on a very, very long time. And I think the light is starting to shine on to the CCP and what part do they actually play in this whole non-for-profit scheme. And we're going to find out that they play a very large part in the non-for-profit stuff that's going on here, mostly in our Asian neighborhoods. And that is yet to come to light. The federal government is going to start to get active.
One example is when groups and nonprofit CEOs attend political fundraisers supporting their preferred candidates, which is against the rules. The New York Times identified at least 53 of these organizations that have allegedly endorsed or raised money for political candidates, likely in violation of the rules against political campaign intervention. According to the Ways and Means Committee, the CCP has used this foreign influential power structure to shape the political environment to influence other countries' policy toward China's ideologies and objectives. In the past, some of these hometown groups have been accused of involvement in secret police stations and efforts to block candidates that were publicly anti-CCP. The Chinese Communist Party has also attacked American nonprofits that are anti-CCP by attempting to have their tax-free status revoked. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
The stakes between the U.S. and China are rising in another key maritime choke point. The U.S. is boosting military cooperation with Indonesia, and at the center of that effort is the Strait of Malacca, one of the world's most important shipping lanes. The move comes as attention grows on this narrow sea lane that carries a huge share of the world's oil, and much of it heads to China. On Monday, the U.S. and Indonesia upgraded their defense relationship to what they're calling a major defense cooperation partnership. The move deepens coordination on maritime security in Southeast Asia. It also highlights the Strait of Malacca, a narrow but critical shipping lane linking the Indian and Pacific Oceans. It's one of the busiest maritime passages in the world. About 23 million barrels of oil pass through each day in early 2025. That's roughly 29% of global seaborne oil trade, and nearly half of those shipments go to China, making the strait a vital energy lifeline for Beijing's economy. Under the new deal, the U.S. and Indonesia will expand joint training, deploy sensors, and integrate American surveillance technology. The goal is to improve monitoring of the waterway and give Washington more presence in the region. Officials say the goal is to boost maritime awareness and security across the region's shipping lanes. The timing is notable. It comes just 1 month before a meeting between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. It underscores the strategic weight of the world's most important oil passage, and this is amid tensions at the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. tightens its grip on the Strait of Hormuz with the naval blockade of Iranian ports. What's the military strategy and how it's already rattling China? More coming up after this break. Stay with us.
Food. It fuels our bodies, nourishes our spirits, and brings us together. Because we all need nutritious food to thrive.
Food gives me energy and it also helps me focus.
But not everyone knows where their next meal is coming from. And 1 in 7 people in America face hunger. It's tougher than ever for too many of us. But the simple truth is, ending hunger is possible, and it starts with you. Call or go online to helpfeedingamerica.org and give $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, to help families.